see the wizard, the wonderful wizard of speed and time. Hello, everybody. This is the 706 podcast, the podcast where we, that is my name's Connor, and my four fellow movie fiends take a look at a movie and decide whether it is one of the 706 greatest films of all time. I would like to introduce you to my co-host, please. Let's go around the room here. How about Tony?
Hi, guys. This is Tony, wizard in training.
And how about Kirk?
Greetings. This is Kirk. Very excited to discuss the Matt Stone and Trey Parker biopic. It's very interesting, very quirky. We'll see what happens.
And Anthony.
Anthony.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, guys. Topic of our discussion today, as before stated, is, of course, The Wizard of Speed and Time, the feature-length film from 1988, not to be confused with the short from 1979 by the same director, which is also the basis of the feature film that we just watched. It's a little bit complicated, but anyway, the long and short of it, if you've never heard of this film before, I encourage you, obviously, check it out. But one thing you should know is that Mike Jittlov was a sort of amateur kind of special effects man and animator who eventually broke into Hollywood, did some kind of stop motion animation, and pioneered this method of live action stop motion with pixelation, is how he describes it, which is basically taking pictures, stepping through, and basically having the human body do things that you couldn't typically do, right? Using a kind of stop motion technique, just right, the use of camera frames. Obviously, this is a very old technique, but it wasn't used to quite the extent that, or he used it to a greater extent than ever seen before. And one thing that Jittlov really does well is animating like inanimate objects. So it seems as if, you're interacting with, he's one where, like the objects in a clothing store come alive, like the clothes start dancing, that kind of thing. So he made this short film, The Wizard of Speed and Time, which showcases his live action stop motion, which it was sort of like, it was really supposed to be broadcast on TV. It wasn't necessarily a huge hit at the time. Not a whole lot of people saw it, but eventually it kind of made its way, as it often did, to kind of the circuit of science fiction conventions, which often would show little movies. And there was just something that would typically happen. There would be these kind of films that were kind of associated with these kind of conventions, like in the 70s and 80s. And this was just a little short film that people loved watching, and it became kind of a big hit. It became kind of a staple of these science fiction conventions. So it developed this kind of cult following, of which Mike Jittlov was proud. Mike Jittlov continued to try to work in Hollywood. He was very frustrated, but he eventually did. I think his deal was he wanted to make a certain stop motion or very special effects heavy film called Speed. But before he could do that, he was asked to make a cheaper movie. And he came up with the idea to make a film about the making of Wizard of Speed and Time. So basically this short film that he did from the past 5 years. So he's basically just already, it's extremely self-referential. Everything kind of goes back to Mike Jittlov. And what can I say about this film? I mean, there's so much that I want to say that like words are kind of failing me. I just find this to be this amazing, quirky, fun, unique sort of showcase of Mike Jittlov as a directorial mind, but also as a weird, unique personality. I mean, he inserts so much of himself into this movie that it always just intrigues me. But anyway, let's not worry too much about the plot. Basically, it's a very simple story of he's trying to get the movie made. There's all kinds of obstacles in his way. He finally gets the movie made. Happy ending. But I'm curious what you guys made of all this. Let us know. Is this the first time watching it? What did you make of it? And also, I want to weigh in a little bit on the question of, did you like it in the same way that you like, I don't know, like a really good movie? Were you kind of laughing and enjoying the movie with the movie? Or were you kind of enjoying the movie sort of in spite of the movie, against the movie in a sort of ironic sense? I think that'll be an interesting topic for today. Let's go with, how about Anthony first?
Sure. So in terms of watching this movie, I had never even heard of it. And my context for the film and for Jittlov himself is pretty much Connor's introduction last week, along with the array of study materials that Connor supplied for the week, which range in interest from like really kind of artistic endeavor. I mean, there's an obvious talent, there's obvious skill at what he's doing and everything, which is fascinating. But as for this movie itself, I think on one hand, what I said last week was somewhat true, that the ideal way to watch this movie may be late at night in a movie theater that's half full, half empty, depending on how you want to look at it, with a crowd to kind of enable your laughter, enable the humor to kind of take hold. At the same time, at the beginning, especially, I did find myself laughing at what I thought was the movie's attempt at humor. And again, towards the end, there's a whole pool sequence when he's thrown into the pool. And, you know, a number of characters are commenting about this guy drowning on one hand, maybe for the film or maybe for the check, maybe for the artistic merit of the film and preserving it, or maybe just to kind of pull a show, or maybe just that he's actually drowning, which becomes this kind of hilarious sequence, I thought, and it really actually kept me going. At the same time, the movie does suffer, I think, from the sort of problem anything strange and different kind of suffers from, which is like at times it does just kind of feel like it drags. And because I didn't have a crowd with me, I was kind of just sitting there hoping the film would pick itself back up for me, hoping the strangeness would come back. And it did. But at the same time, as I said, you know, it's kind of countered with the unenjoyment of the film. But one thing I was thinking about is, you know, to think about the way you introduced this last week, Connor, which was a sort of cultural artifact when a time when nerd culture is still sort of underground. It's not the way we know of it today, of course. Computers are still different. Special effects still feel, you know, pun not intended, they come from a wizard themselves. And what's fascinating about this movie is, you know, to think about what it has to say. You know, the trailer at the end of the YouTube thing talks about it as a sort of Pee Wee Herman-like thing. And at times it does feel like it's sort of unrefined version in which everything is set loose. But we get all these references along the way to unions, of course, the system of Hollywood, which always seems to be pushing down on artists and individuals. And at the same time, we have these kind of brief allusions to Reagan. Of course, we're in '88, the kind of tail end of Reagan's actual presidency, even if the Reagan years don't end for a little longer. And, you know, of course, we get that great sequence where the president interrupts the film to talk about the taxes, which are kind of unbearably harsh and ready to take everything from the little guy, except unless they're a government employee or whatever. And at times, you know, it seems conservative, actually, when you really pull back. It seems somewhat anti-union, making fun of bureaucracy. At other times, it seems, you know, somewhat of a leftism, I should say, about it. And I think that's where I'd come down with it, which is that ultimately the film, I think, does something different that we don't actually get anymore. And it reminds me of what Connor says about the sort of paralysis of culture. What this movie's doing is giving us an interesting look at bureaucracy in a sort of Terry Gilliam-esque way, a sort of Kafka-esque way at times. And I don't know if it fully knows what to say, but I think it's because it's trapped itself. And I think that trappedness is part of the kind of enjoyment and part of the sort of thing to read about in this movie, if you so choose. Maybe at the end of the day, it's just a quirky movie. I'll end it here and just say, ultimately, I enjoyed it. I have reservations. I don't know if it's a great movie necessarily. I think it's more of along the line of a sort of fun B movie to watch at night in the theater still. Midnight kind of showing.
Sure. So still has some merits, but overall, its enjoyment would mostly be from the fun of kind of picking it apart in a way, and also laughing to it. Jittlov's, you know, very ardent political views. I don't think Reagan is mentioned, but this takes place during the Carter years, it seems. And it seems to kind of be retroactively kind of justifying all kind of Reaganomics and, you know, kind of liberalization across the board. So he seems to kind of really have a bone to pick with unions and with the IRS. Those are kind of, you know, Jittlov's personal enemies that he spares no expense and no film in skewering in this film. But thank you, Anthony, for that reflection. Now, next, I would like to go to Tony.
Hey guys, so I don't even know where to start with this movie, man. Like, I love this movie. I think this movie's great. And Connor asked the question of like how much of our enjoyment is sincere or ironic, and my take has always been that line is a lot blurrier than we like to think. And I think this movie's a great illustration of why, because to me, like, this movie, I think, is such a great movie about being an artist in the artistic process, because I think being a great artist requires two things. It requires technical skill and having the discernment and good taste and good judgment to apply that skill in a deliberate way, right? And Jittlov is a great example of someone who has the former. He has undeniable technical skill. He's almost like a virtuoso with the special effects, the animation. There are sequences in this movie that are kind of stunning in their way. I love the creativity on display, the color, the short itself, which he expands upon at the climax of the film. And that sequence at the end where we see the full short he's been making, I think is wonderful, like totally unironically wonderful. It's a joy to watch. It's very fun. It's very creative. But what Jittlov lacks is that other aspect. He has no discernment or judgment or good taste. And he made one of the most masturbatory and solipsistic movies I've ever seen in my life. He's so trapped in his own head and is so unable to find his way out. And to me, there's something kind of heartbreaking and tragic about it, because I feel like Jittlov has like almost just enough self-awareness to know his own limits, but he can't transcend them at all. And even things like the love story with Cindy, which is the cringiest part of the movie. Everything with women in this movie is super weird and super uncomfortable. There's the scene where he and Cindy walk to his bedroom and the words "the bedroom scene" flash on the bottom of the screen. It's like something a 14-year-old boy would do in a student project. This is a visibly like almost middle-aged looking man. I'm not sure what year he made this. And there's just something very like sad about it, and also off-putting and just like uncomfortable, and just like, I mean, there were so many moments in this movie like that where I was just like, wow, and just little lines that were so like give such insight into his psychology. The whole idea of the world just conspiring against him. It's related to the bedroom scene where Cindy says to him, "I guess you don't have any trouble getting girls," when he has the 30 women on the street to film his project. And yeah, just every little bias, every little resentment manifests itself in this movie. And at times, for example, when he's going through this, there's this sequence where he's kind of navigating the guild system and its bureaucracy. And he's going from union to union, and they're like, you need to do this, you need to do that. And like, if you put away the political context, this like anti-union, I would characterize the politics of the film as actually pretty coherent. I think he's a libertarian, very clearly. He's like kind of stands up for the little guy, quote unquote, and hates any kind of authority, any kind of bureaucracy, any kind of anything, whether that's coded as like left or right. This movie makes fun of the police, but it makes fun of the IRS and the unions, the federal government, all this stuff. It's a very like, I just want to do my thing and no one can hold me back. It's very like Ayn Rand almost. But no, yes, this guild sequence where he's going to the different unions and like trying to get approval and trying to get in the union and finding all this, that's actually like a pretty good and funny sequence. It has this Looney Tunes kind of manic energy. And you got these big, really wide lenses that distort everything. It has that very Brazil, very Terry Gilliam, So like there's an undeniable craft on display, but it's in service of kind of this very empty feeling, this very lacking movie. If I had to summarize the point of this movie in one sentence, it would be, why can't someone just hire Mike Jittlov? And that's all he had to say. And to me, the defining moment of the movie is early on, and he's having this, like, it's kind of it's supposed to be a tender, like emotional moment about our wistful dreamer of the main character. And he's like, why don't they give me a chance? Or like, oh, the dreams I could spin, the things I could do. The great irony of that moment is like, he is being given a chance. He's making a feature film right now. And this is the story he chose to tell. He chose to tell a story about how he couldn't do anything better than the movie he made. And there's something very ironic about that. And also I think very sad about it. And it's kind of unintentionally poetic. So I love this movie on all those levels. I love the fun. I think it's funny. I think it's kind of cringeworthy at times, but in a way that amuses me. And I think it's such a rich portrait of this kind of sad and troubled person that I probably would not want to be friends with, but I can still relate to in certain ways.
Thank you, Tony. Yes. I mean, they make a reference in the film to a script that Jittlov has, which is apparently the script for the movie that we're watching, not for the movie that's being made in the movie. However, at the very end of the movie, it turns out even the cast of this movie were watching the movie that we just watched. So there's kind of a meta thing there. I think, in fact, Mike Jittlov was really interested. He had this project that actually does appear in a little, like everything, like anything that anyone can possibly know about Jittlov appears in this film as well, in some kind of form of cameo or reference or nod or background thing. You'll see a poster for the movie Speed, which is what the movie that he really wanted to make. And this was a little bit of a compromise, but I still think, he really embraced, this kind of this building this monument purely to himself, and capturing his worldview and his life as he would ideally like it to be told. But anyway, how about Kirk? Let's have you weigh in on all this, social worker.
Well, as per usual, I've been relegated to the sidelines here in the back annals of the podcast, but the people's voice will not be silenced. And I will say, from mainstream normalized perspective, this film is hot garbage. It's painfully esoteric. So I enjoy movies just like I enjoy true crime media, whether it's books, articles, podcasts. But where I kind of draw the line is when you see snuff films, things like, I don't know, Faces of Death, right? It's true crime, and it's the most visceral one-to-one kind of relation that you could have to it, aside from actually witnessing a real event. But it's too much. And I think most people that, listen to Serial or watch Making a Murderer would say the same. Like, they don't want to see a guy's eyeballs pop out while he's being electrocuted. So that's how I feel about this film. It's a movie about filmmaking. It's a movie about the artistic process, but it just feels too raw, too unfinished, or even too haphazard at times. It comes from a mind of someone who doesn't seem very well adjusted to society, which can be endearing at times, but often in this film, it just feels annoying. Feels like he adopted some of the views of his dad, and he just wants to kind of espouse them, especially regarding social issues. The women are often purely like sexual objects or sensual objects. Yeah, it's interesting. You could almost use this as like a psychological evaluation of Mike Jittlov. And I think it would be a more accurate portrayal than, for say, like a mental status exam. Honestly, I think you would learn more about his inner psychological workings by watching this film. And it's not a place I really wanted to go, I would say. He's a very creative person. I'm going to kind of, at the risk of reiterating some of the other points, he's very creative, but he does suffer from this like persecution complex at times, which, like Tony pointed out, is very ironic, because here's somebody who should never have been given the amount of agency he has been given. I mean, this is somebody who should veer away from any sort of feature filmmaking, in my opinion, and he's being allowed to do that. And it's kind of one of those things, like what Anthony said, where weirdness and quirkiness can only take you so far. It's good for some amusement. I'm not sure if people actually enjoy watching this film, or if they like to think they enjoy watching this film. Maybe that's on a surface level. On an ironic level, I can understand enjoying watching this film, just like I can understand enjoying watching The Room for the same purpose. The stop motion sequences are very well done. So in that sense, it's masterful and technically quite proficient. But outside of that, the actual, kind of the live action stuff is really kind of cringy and hard to watch. And I'm not really sure that I have any true insight to provide that might not have been already by my co-host. I will just say that, it's kind of an exercise in getting too close to something. And, I think that Hollywood aura, that kind of shared understanding of distance between us and a film, or a piece of media, there's a certain level of polish, a certain level of kind of like a mutual understanding that of what we are going into. And Jittlov just kind of feels unaware of that. It's kind of like, it feels like he's barging into my room and kind of blaring, cartoon music in my ears, and it feels like I'm being violated in a sense. I don't know if that's just a kind of like a fleeting feeling I had, but it was almost like, my sensibilities were violated. And one thing I will say that hasn't been mentioned is, as someone who really has no grasp on how the movie making process outside of just very basic terms and techniques, it was very interesting to see all the equipment they needed. And it seemed like he was very eager to show us his prowess with regards to making movies, or to filming in general, all the necessary requirements and equipment. And I don't know if that was kind of like just this child who couldn't keep it in, and he just wanted to show his knowledge, almost like a compensatory act, where it's like, hey, look how smart I am, look how proficient I am. And that you often see that when people I don't know if I won't even go there in terms of what I was about to say, but you might be able to infer what I might have to say about Jittlov to a certain extent. But it was creative, it was original. I think that these works should always be propagated and widely available, and they should be celebrated for what they are. I do not feel like to evaluate this as a feature film, I think is unfair. I think you really have to evaluate it as just kind of like this project, this amorphous piece of art that you can kind of pick and choose what you'd like from it, because certain scenes are just totally useless, and the overall story is quite useless. But there are these moments, especially like the opening sequence is fantastic. Some of the musical numbers are a little interesting, just little touches. I don't even know what you would call these effects that kind of make his eyes lighten up his eyes, or when he pulls out his business card, there's like a blue flash. Those are kind of cool, and I appreciated them, and I'd probably find even more on the second viewing, but I don't think that'll sadly ever happen for me, because it's a little too migraine inducing. I don't know, there's something about it, but that could also be personal sensibility. Anyways, those are my thoughts.
I'm curious, Kirk. So you mentioned like esoteric. I mean, maybe that's just talking about the fact that the movie itself is obscure. But like, for instance, was it too much detail about all the film stuff? Sometimes I think he kind of mires himself. Like, what was the main note of badness? I think you're saying it's not just that it's technically bad. Do you think it feels technically sloppy, or is it just like, give me an example of a moment that struck you?
No, I think it's a combination of the fact that it's about making movies. It's the movie about making movies, mixed with just the sheer technicality of it all, the granularity that I think would really turn off just a broader audience, which I think it's fine. Something doesn't need to be crafted with a broad audience in mind. For me, though, it felt a little bit like, if you aren't very much involved in film or film adjacent, I don't know how much you can pull from this. Aside from the stunning kind of stop motion effects, I don't know what else there is to really pull from it. The humor is, I would say, half-baked and not necessarily exemplary. I mean, in an ironic sense, it certainly is. But I don't know. There's just that element that it feels very much like you're walking down this forgotten alley and you kind of lose your way a little bit. And it made me long for, a little more conventionality. And maybe that makes me a simpleton. I feel very much like your friend Tyler would very much have enjoyed this film and probably sings its praises. So if that helps you triangulate how I feel about it, it's basically
that's like very helpful for the audience.
No, it's helpful for you, so you can maybe help, you maybe respond in kind. But basically, somebody who likes things that are weird for the sake of them being weird. But this is weird and talented, so it's hard. It's a hard mixture. But I just think that we have to remember that sometimes subtlety is a talent in and of itself. And there was nothing about this film was subtle. So yeah, to me, it just feels like they go back to my metaphor in the beginning. There has to be some distance, some sort of, transmission process before it reaches, it's almost like this belonged on YouTube. Do you know what I mean? A very direct medium where you can go straight from the camera to the consumer. There is no middleman. And I think that's ultimately how he would prefer it. Of course, he'd like to be compensated for it, which is kind of the irony as well. But yeah, it's a strange film.
It is, Kirk. I wholeheartedly agree. And I'm glad. I think it's Jittlov stuff has so found its place on YouTube, right? I think it is. I think you're right. I mean, I think the way most people discovered this film, honestly, is actually, it was just one of those things. It was this kind of VHS kind of thing people had lying around, this random movie. Yeah, it's about making movies. And, you'll see the weird guy, like, make his weird, do all of his weird special effects. And yeah, I don't know, it has this ethos of this totally VHS style, like kind of a flubber almost esque, just like seeing him hanging out in his house with all the little toys running around. I could see myself having loved it. I never saw it until very recently, but there's an appeal to it. But okay, to what Kirk was saying, Kirk is, and you all have brought up some, really amazing things, the critical things. Of course, that crux of the issue of like, okay, and what I think Kirk was referring to at the very end there, right? That lack of a self-awareness, that lack of an ability to self-edit, which creates this, kind of ego run amok, which leads to things that are truly bad, that are artistically bad, artistically not meritorious. But we can nevertheless find that interesting. And I think it may be kind of the future of art in a way, this idea of art that reflects the persona of another person almost, or like imagining the art as created by another person, right? Or I think there's something about us that we love to savor the idea of these weird found objects by weird people, right? That we can kind of pick apart and kind of decipher and figure out who that person is. It obviously just shows as time goes on, right? An increasingly sophisticated level of enjoyment. But all that being said, this kind of ironic enjoyment, which I think, yes, I get it. Obviously, it's so funny when Jittlov, goes on and when he inserts things like, you'll see a shot of like his tiny writing. So like he has all these like random kind of like talents that he cultivates, that like, for instance, being able to like hold his breath for a really long time, that he shows off every single one in this movie. So it's that kind of thing. It's an inability to hold himself back, but I love it. And it's fun on an ironic level. But then as I've watched this, it comes back around to just being pure enjoyment and honestly, for me, awe of this film. Like, I really think it does land for me, like on a very like visceral level, like the gags, the kind of sense of humor, the running gag of his weird electrified bicycle, and like the chain of people, like that stuff is so cute. Like it's so fun and like wacky. And even like the very first gag about like, I gave you the clap, that kind of thing. I just love like the kind of wacky and intentionally kind of corny humor of Jittlov. There's something that just works for me there. Maybe it savors of a more innocent, a more kind of non-reflective, a little bit more untrammeled kind of nerd, from the past that I can somehow identify with, right? A little bit less sophistication, self-awareness, but more just kind of pure love of these things and pure love of having fun. I mean, I just love that about it. And so it's, to me, the more I think about this movie, the more I watch it, the more it kind of, like Monkey Shines, the more it like grows in my estimation, the more seriously I take it, which is perhaps the wrong attitude, because I think, as Anthony said, the best way to enjoy this movie, and I'm so glad I didn't get a chance to, since I discovered this during the pandemic, but if you watch it, gather around a couch and watch it. I think it's perfect for that. But no, I become obsessed with its merits. I think personally, it's quite good as a feature film. I think it's very tightly written. There's a little bit of like the wacky scenarios and kind of things that feel like they're kind of thrown in for the form of it. And he seems to kind of acknowledge that they're thrown in through the form of it. But I think it all like resolves nicely. It has this like satisfying climax, and it kind of follows these genre conventions that doesn't reflect the real story, but he's willing to just, out of a love of good old fashioned pure movie magic, he's going to just do this traditional story for you, right? He's just going to do, he's going to get the girl at the end, right? He kind of revels in these very classic narratives. And that's the thing about Jittlov is, again, we're talking about ego, but Jittlov, I think, he fits into kind of a pantheon or a sort of constellation of people of mostly of his generation. I've been thinking they're mostly kind of Californian, often kind of libertarian types. But I'm thinking of this kind of idea of the American kind of auteur entrepreneur. I think one of his biggest heroes is Walt Disney, for example. He mentions, Walt Disney started in a garage. And of course, we know the idea of the startup, right? The Steve Jobs figures, the West Coast tech entrepreneurs. I think Jittlov belongs to that generation or that kind of ethos. And Jittlov wants to present himself as that. This idea of this individual with all sorts of weird little talents, kind of Houdini-esque, entertaining people, but also connecting them, also somehow selling a product that can just speak to people on like a personal level. And that's kind of this 20th century turn, right? From products being just simply things you buy to being like, kind of expressions of identity and all this. Like, anyway, I think there's something really interesting about Jittlov as this kind of character who his worldview, the worldview that he espouses is the worldview that currently like rules this place that we live in, right? This is kind of, in some ways, a kind of dominant worldview, right? This kind of libertarian view, right? And those pioneers and those kind of big, Disney figures, right, now kind of run this world to the point where we're looking at this incredible kind of oppressive stagnation. So I find there's something very like interesting about Jittlov at this moment, that he, if he had he gotten his way, we would have, a Jittlov streaming service, obviously, but he didn't, because he was not trammeled, because he could not like cast himself down and put himself down enough to ever get to that point, because he was too much just simply purely himself to like turn himself into a product. He couldn't sell himself. I guess he kind of managed to, at least this time. So there's something like very interesting about that to me, and very ironic. But in this world where like, I think like we live in kind of the shadows of other Jitlovs, but Jittlov himself, as you can find out, it's very sad. Jittlov lives pretty much the same exact life. You can see footage of him. He still has, he has long, kind of almost Doc Brown hair, but he has the same jackets. He's lived in the same house, or I think at least he's owned, his mother's house. Like he's just lived the exact same life. So he's kind of this arrested development figure. As you can kind of tell, he's kind of the sad dork, but still with such charisma and such a willingness and such a confidence, right, in his ability and the power of his story, right, to like speak to people, and like there's something so kind of all American and wonderful about that. And it's like, I envy it. I envy having that kind of self-confidence and that kind of lack of self-consciousness and that unwillingness just to like, that willingness to, in a kind of Nietzschean way, if we want to intellectualize it, just like to create your own, grand, sort of self-sustaining or life-affirming self-narrative, I love it. So, anyway, I see Jittlov as kind of a hero, I have to say. Though of course there are things about him that, maybe are not so great. But anyways, anyone wants to ring in, Tony, did we want to weigh in there?
I was going to say, this is truly my beautiful, dark, twisted fantasy of the 1980s for sure. But no, I love what you said though about kind of the political context, because it is really interesting actually, because the short comes out in 1977, movie's like a decade later, right? And I think the president is supposed to be Carter. At the end, he's got like a slight Southern accent, and he's talking about all this, the taxes and stuff, which obviously was Reagan. That was his whole thing. He was like, "Oh, we're going to cut taxes. Get the government off your back." And this is such a great window into, at that time, the type of person who would have been all about that, and like what that the mindset that speaks to, and that like attitude, which I think was as kind of crankish as Jittlov seems in this movie, a widespread view, or at least something that could be sold to people, because it's not like we come out of the womb thinking these things. We're shaped by society, and we're given a certain acceptable window of beliefs, and we pick and choose based on all sorts of things, our socioeconomic status, our social environments, our parents, and so on. And this is such a great window of, at this moment, the kind of person who is like buying this message, the kind of person with whom this message really really resonates, you know, despite maybe the more unsavory aspects of that message. You can either swallow them or you affirmatively buy into them yourself. And it's interesting too, this movie comes out 88. So this is like the end of Reagan's presidency, but he still has, you know, and I don't want to make assumptions. Maybe Jittlov doesn't like Reagan. I don't know. But like, it's interesting that he still has that. He still carries that resentment. He still carries that sense of being thwarted at every turn. And I do love as Connor said, the confidence of it, the confidence of the gesture of even making this movie, the lack of self-consciousness. But I think what's brilliant about it, and I mean, the word brilliant sort of like implies it was intentional, but I mean, what is interesting about this movie to me and sets it apart is like, there's sort of the meta level of the storytelling where it's like, while the whole movie is about how this guy just never got his chance and never got to make that leap into the Hollywood inner circle, the evidence for why that never happened is in the movie itself. Like, we can see his shortcomings that he can't see. And I love that tension and that kind of the genuine, I think, sadness of that. And I do, you know, to speak to Kirk's kind of lack of connection to it. I mean, I did go to film school, you know, and I always kind of gravitate towards these kind of underdog artist stories. And like, I've always really identified with the person who's just trying to like make a movie or trying to do something. So it's such a great window into that mindset and like what that can turn into in a certain kind of person. And also like, yes, the nerd culture thing too. And that sense of being thwarted, the sense of not getting your just desserts, which we can see even today in nerd culture, you know, and it just like, and I don't know if this is where the time that started, maybe that's always been a thing with, you know, fan culture or whatever, but it's an interesting little time capsule to this moment of nerd culture and the seeds for what we have today.
I notice even there's a moment where, you know, I love this moment where he's presenting his film to this, you know, incredibly unfriendly, you know, like studio person. And, you know, she basically makes him jump through all these hoops and they won't let him show it. But, you know, he tries to show it. He says, like, it's based on the Dr. Magic comic book. He's like, what? We don't do any of that comic book junk. You know, we have professional writers. So like little moments like that, you know.
And then you fast forward to today where everything is comic books. But at the same time, it feels far more, you know, separated from his sensibilities. So it's an interesting inversion in that sense. It's like the commodification of nerd culture, of course. But, you know, I think you were talking about the parallels with him and, you know, figures like Disney or some other entrepreneurs of, you know, the 20th century, I guess, because they're, you know, obviously one's far older. But, you know, Disney had Roy. Steve Wozniak had Steve Jobs, you know, and I don't know that Jittlov had his Steve Jobs. And I think anybody who was on kind of the production, the larger scope end of it, you know, looking at things from the perspective of an audience member or a consumer, really did him a disservice. And I think, you know, whether it was nefarious or just naive that they thought this was going to land in any sort of way, I do feel bad for him. And it is kind of tragic because I feel like he probably, and I'm inferring a lot, truly believes, like Tony said, that like he was a great artist that was thwarted by X or Y instead of just his inability to grasp kind of social conditions and like what people actually enjoy in terms of entertainment. He can see the trees, he cannot see the forest, right? He can see the spectacular detail, but he doesn't realize what it's a larger part of. And that's really sad in a way. And I hope that he's found some peace with it, or maybe even some insight into his thought processes, because yeah, it's entertaining, but at the same time, it's, you know, a little bit disquieting, right? This really great talent who you hope would have found some peace in life, but might just be receiving the brunt of the joke at most times in the last 30 years or 33 years or however long it's been.
Well, Kirk, I would say, yeah, that's part of the problem, right? Are we just laughing at him or laughing with him? Do we want to believe we're laughing with him? So we're not laughing at him so we can still enjoy, you know, I mean, obviously I'm doing a little bit of both here, but I do think, yeah, I mean, I think we all agree he was like very talented, especially as regards stop motion. It was kind of immediately made obsolete by what they show in the film, which is kind of the digital techniques. So like, he was kind of all analog. Like I said, the reason I kind of like him is he's just a little bit, kind of before his time, after his time. I don't know. I mean, had he been born a little earlier or later, but certainly earlier, I guess, in this case, because again, this kind of analog style of editing and of using, these title effects and things like that, which he was so great at, and, managed to achieve such a great effect, such that I've never seen anything quite like it. Yeah, it's kind of been all obviated by digital, editing techniques and that kind of thing. So it's like, yeah, again, there's a little bit of a fatality, to Mike Jittlov in a way that I find really like, kind of interesting and kind of moving. And I think it's why it's like, I want to raise this movie up high. And when I want to be part of that march that carries Jittlov through the streets of Hollywood, I want to be part of that. I want to celebrate him, because I feel like there's a little bit of a doomed, struggle for greatness, in this work, as absurd as it is, right? But so is every struggle for meaning, right?
Let me jump in real quick, because this is a debate that I've gotten into, I think, years back a lot with Tony about the director of The Room. Was it Tommy Wiseau? I don't remember how to say it. And that Tony was often someone who proffered the idea that Tommy Wiseau legitimately thought he was making a good movie. And me, being the cynical person I am, thought no, that he was purposely making a bad one, and he knew the joke. And I think so much of what we're doing here so far depends on how we view Jittlov as a sort of Randian hero, or a sort of hero who believes in his own art, even if it's ultimately not connected to succeed. But I actually want to pull back on that, because I think the movie has a more cynical approach, and it has a more secret sadness to it, which is to think of the one really earnest scene we get. And it becomes kind of early on, after he doesn't think the film's going to be made, in which he sits in his kind of room and he thinks to himself, how many scripts go unmade? How many great films are left, as thoughts? And he kind of offers this kind of speech, right? But what the film seems to really suggest in that moment is maybe we do need gatekeepers, because hindsight being 2020, when we let the floodgates break open, what we are left with is with lots of Jitlovs. People who want to be part of art, people who want to create art, may have some sort of talent in certain places, in the case of Jitlov being a technical ability, but may not have the talent for an overall sort of approach. And what we're left with is what we now know of really today, which is 10 seconds, 15 seconds of great clips, humorous things that if we don't like, we slide to the next thing. And in many ways, this movie seems to kind of offer a prescient look at something like TikTok, or a Twitter feed, an Instagram feed. We don't like the image, we go to the next one. And that really seems to be the kind of humor he wants to take. And at the same time, what I think is really the sad part of this movie that we're missing is that Jitlov's character actually has to commodify his audience, that he has to invite that audience to be part of the creation for them to ultimately like what they're doing. We get a few characters who do say, what is this? Why would I want to be part of it? And it's only once they're as part of the group, part of this group for this vision, that they ultimately get carried away with it. And at the same time, is that something to really celebrate? Is it something to kind of succeed? Is this postmodern approach he wants to take to his own movie really something that we want more of? And at times it kind of honestly feels like it's a no, because what are we left with by the end of the movie? Characters watching a movie, characters creating a movie, and we ask ourselves, wouldn't we like to be part of that? Well, maybe we shouldn't. And maybe Jitlov actually has the wrong approach. Maybe he is just another California entrepreneur selling us a sort of Elon Musk dream that we think we want, but we really shouldn't, for the better of society. I think the real moment in this film that's kind of key, and this will be my last thought, is that what he does with the money he makes, he doesn't give to himself to make another movie. He gives to other filmmakers. He puts it in a mailbox that says all the starving directors or screenwriters. I think it's directors, right? So he's not even invested in his own vision by the end of the movie. He's invested in other people's dreams, because he recognizes it himself. Other people actually should be making better movies than I do. And maybe that's also a lesson to sort of walk away with.
I love the comp to Elon Musk. Can we compare Mike Jitlov's humor to Elon Musk's Twitter feed?
Yes.
Like they're 1-to-1. It's really crazy. So, anyways,
I also thought of Elon Musk when I was watching this. It's very weird. It does seem to be sort of like I kind of get what you're saying.
It's what I mean. I think of like this will be a weird reference for some of you, but like Slate Star Codex or Astral Codex 10. There's a blogger who's kind of popular in Silicon Valley, like kind of defied this idea of like the gray tribe, who's neither like the East Coast kind of blue liberals or the kind of red state people, right? It's kind of a distinct group that's often very libertarian, very interested in conservation, kind of concentrated in California. And I think there's some, to me, there's some sociological reality to that. Certainly in the case of these kind of Silicon Valley entrepreneur types. But yeah, Anthony, I'm wondering if I didn't quite get what you meant. I agree that we can see him as an Elon Musk and as a failed Elon Musk. And maybe there's a value in seeing the kind of the way in which, Elon Musk is more successful bullshitting us, but like for Jittlov, we kind of see it right away. Maybe he's kind of cautionary in that way. That's interesting. I would say there's something kind of redemptive in his having failed. But what did you mean by like the idea of like the postmodern? Is there rejection of meaning in this film? There's no sense of.
I think it's a sense, right? Is the sort of what I mean by the postmodern is to think about not only the techniques he's using, things like what we've referred to as the bedroom scene in subtitles to create the humor, the crowd scene to create the sort of humor, to remind us of where we're at in these sort of genre conventions. But I think I refer to postmodern in this sort of traditional meta sense, that he is inviting us to be part of that crowd, that we are meant to feel like we are watching a character not only make a film, and by continuing to watch the film, we're enabling him to make it. And I think that's what I refer to as the sort of postmodern touch here, that we're vested and we're part of the story itself, or in the temporality of it as it's being told, which is itself maybe something worrisome as it's happening. Does that make sense?
I think I understand. I mean, there's a very interesting postmodern thrust. Comes at the very end. We're watching the credits and we see the characters of the movie apparently having watched the movie that we just watched, and they seem to be talking. But then we realize, in fact, that the commentary is not coming from the people we're seeing on screen, that is the characters sitting in the movie theater. The commentary instead seems to be coming from our side of the theater. It seems to be coming from the people who are watching the screen right now. I don't know if you noticed that, because they comment on like, look, he's about to like kiss her or whatever, like, or hey, there's the heavy, right? There's this kind of cute moment of like, is Jittlov trying to guide your expectations? Are you supposed to feel satisfied? You're just say, oh, hey, look at that guy, he's great. Or is it really them watching themselves? I mean, there's something very interesting about that. And Jitlov's good with that. I mean, he's good at having these kind of intriguing, kind of moments. And I think that takes a great artist, someone with a little bit of self-awareness too. And I think he does kind of have it, but I don't know. It's hard to say, isn't it? Any other thoughts?
I'll just offer my final kind of thought that I'm reminded of a few other YouTubers, among them like Pest Animation. He's really good at stop motion. I think he won some sort of accolade, but he's really great. PES, and also Captain Disillusion. There's something there as well. This person who's so enthusiastic about like visual effects and wants to debunk all these videos. And I think Jittlov could have been Captain Disillusion, who has 10 million subscribers, something like that. He would have done well on YouTube. At the end, you're talking like, it's almost like he's asking us to hit the like button, right? With that end credit scene in a way, like he's asking for our affirmation at the end. Like, hey, wasn't that kind of cool? Hey, look, yeah, that guy was. So it feels like he was born too soon, because these pieces of his creation, I think, all belong on a platform like YouTube, where there's an ability to kind of forget what you just watched to move to the next thing. I don't know if I had gone to a theater and I had sat and watched this film and then I had gone home and tried to go to sleep and was like, fuck, I just wasted my Saturday night going to see Wizard of Space and Time. Like, you know what I mean? Like, he belongs in a more transient space, a less committed space. somewhere where we can kind of pontificate about the eccentricities of popular culture in the 80s, but not a place where we view art in an earnest way that requires a sense of subtlety and moderation. I think that is totally lacking. I don't think he spared any thought. I don't think he left any thought that he had on the editing room floor. You know, in terms of technical ideas, I'm sure he did, but in terms of what he wanted to convey to the audience, I think he knew this might have been his only chance. So he said it all, you know. And anyways, that's kind of my thought. And I'll give my vote now, unless we had something else we wanted to talk about.
Go ahead, Kirk.
All right. Well, Connor, you're going to have to go 2 in a row, because I'm just going to say no to this, though. I think it was really cool. And, you know, I'm happy I saw it. But oftentimes I'm a softie and I turn around because, you know, I turn my vote around because of some sort of novelty. But I just, yeah, something about it rubbed me the wrong way. Maybe if he had different politics. No, I'm just kidding. It was hectic. It was frenetic. It was enjoyable at times, a little bit funny. But ultimately, I don't think it's worthy of induction into our canon.
Sure, Kirk. I understand. It's not to everyone's taste, but maybe the Wizard next time around. Maybe you'll have to watch some more of his YouTube videos and shorts to see the true magic of Mike Jittlov. But I guess while we're on it, everybody, let's have some other final votes. I'm leaning towards Tony because he might say yes. So let's go Tony next with his final verdict, and we'll see where Anthony lands.
Sure. So yeah, I'm a yes for all the reasons I said. And I do love, what I prize above anything else is just the experience of watching the movie. And I find this movie to be delightful and sticky in a lot of ways. It's like a fun movie to kind of pull apart. It's a fascinating moment. I'm glad it got made and that we can still watch it, you know. And also too, like, and I discovered this movie through Connor. So I just want to say, like, this is what I love about discovering new movies, are these little weird discoveries, you know, from another time. And just like, I'm so glad I know about this movie and I've seen it a couple of times now. And this is definitely a movie that I would, you know, try to force other people to watch as they sit silently and uncomfortably. So for all those reasons, it's a yes.
Thank you,
See, and
Tony.
that's like most YouTube videos too. It's like, hey guys, watch this YouTube video. It's really funny, and then no one laughs, and you feel bad.
It's like 12 minutes long, and you're like, oh, I'm 4 minutes in. I can't back out now.
Well, this is why we have podcasts. This is sort of the idea. We sublimate our urge to make people watch things into a podcast. But okay, last but not least, Anthony, with the final verdict. Which way will he swing? Let's see.
Yeah, this is tough. Let me just say, it's like Connor's great because on one hand he'll nominate like Hidden Fortress, and then we'll get like a Wizard of Speed and Time, and you know, and it's just such interesting range. And I never would have discovered this movie, heard of it, or watched it without, you know, having selected it and hearing the nomination. You know, I think at the end of the day, it's like, why didn't Jittlov just make like a stop motion film, 20-30 minutes, like a full thing? Like that would have been, I think, the real substance, the real thing to kind of get everyone behind. Instead, we're left with something that's very polarizing or divisive, as seen, you know, by the two other voters. So this is tough. Like, I'm kind of like wavering back and forth. I'm going to give it a soft no. But I think mainly it's because Connor made the great mistake, and I had the great pleasure of this mistake, but of sending those early clips. Because I think those other clips, those YouTube videos that you sent, are the real fun way of actually experiencing Jittlov for everybody. That's the thing I would force other people to watch. Not this hour-and-a-half film, but those like fun little like things. That's the kind of excitement for me.
You mean referring to the his other animated shorts, or for instance, the
Yeah,
home where a fan visited Jittlov and it's
no, the
all
animated
kind of
shorts.
weird vibe. Okay.
Yeah. But I'm really glad, you know, we watched this as a group.
Thank you, Anthony. And I'm just so glad I got to show it to you guys. I was glad to have made the discovery. It kind of excited me. You know, I was excited to have found this, you know, interesting auteur, you know, his kind of forgotten auteur, you know, with such personality, that his website, his HTML website is still up, and he's bragging about his one of a kind, like Spock Sugar Smacks box that he's still trying to sell. Anyway, Jittlov is just an interesting figure to me. And I think I may have gone off the deep end a little bit with my love. I've lost a little bit of my critical abilities here, but there's something that really speaks to me about this story and the fact that we're able to experience it, like on YouTube, and on the internet. We're able to kind of tell ourselves the story over again. To me, it's very powerful. But okay, guys, that concludes the Wizard of Speed and Time or review section. Now let's move to the next section, the fan favorite, where you guys recommend a movie and I get to choose which one we'll watch for the next episode. So who went least recently?
First, Kirk.
Kirk. So Kirk, what's the order? What are we doing, buddy?
I'll do what you did last week. I'll just go last. I know it's an inherent disadvantage because, they're going to eliminate 2 decades, but I think there's actually an advantage in hearing what I'm up against. So I'll try to balance that this week.
And I should have mentioned we're doing new Kirk rule whereby we eliminate each recommender can pick 1 decade, right? The next person, if you recommend a movie from the 80s, the next person can't recommend another movie from the 80s, for example. So who's first? Did you say, Kirk?
I'll go Tony, then Anthony, then I'll go last.
Interesting.
All right, so I'm going to do what Kirk did last week, and this is actually, I'm doing you both a favor. I'm picking the 2020s, the shortest decade. So you guys got all of cinema history to pick from. So go for it. Go nuts. I'm going to pick a movie that I saw very recently that is really, really hard to pitch because it's sort of like hides what it's about, but it's a drama that came out relatively recently called Mass, and it's basically the whole movie, most of the movie's in one room, and it's 2 married couples having a conversation. And it is incredibly intense, incredible acting, incredibly emotionally powerful. And I remember I watched it a few weeks ago, and I had a moment like 2/3 of the way through where I was just like, this movie's incredible, or it just took my breath away. And it's very intimate. It's actually the directorial debut from Fran Kranz. You might know him as the stoner character from Cabin in the Woods. And I didn't know that until after I saw the movie. And I was like, oh my God, he wrote and directed this, not based on anything, not based on a book, not based on a play, as a first movie. And that made me like it all the more because I would never have expected that. I also think this is a movie, and I've been wrong the last couple of times I've said this, but I do believe it. I think this is a movie that Kirk will like a lot, actually. I think this is a movie that will speak to Kirk. I do feel that way very strongly. So do with that what you will, but that is my pitch.
I will take that into consideration. Thank you, Tony. Next up, Anthony.
What year was your movie, Tony? 2020?
2021.
Okay, so how did we establish the decades? The 2020 movie is part of this decade, right? So it's eliminated.
That's what we've said. Yeah, that's how.
Okay. So I got to switch up my movie real quick then to my backup movie. Okay, so this is a director I've nominated before, although we haven't chosen. Although I'm going to do a different movie. It's from 2009. So Kirk could start thinking if his movie was from that decade to do something else. Okay, so my movie is from Pedro Almodovar. It's one of his more, I'd say, melodramatic type movies. I don't know if anyone's seen it. It's called Broken Embraces. It stars Penelope Cruz. And it's sort of very interesting movie about a filmmaker who's kind of rethinking his kind of past and what it means to kind of make a movie. It's something I was kind of inspired to pick, or at least have on the docket after watching Wizard of Speed and Time, and having us think about what it means to make a film, what it means to be involved in art. But the film has a sort of unique way of bringing out the values, the themes, the histories of something like a Douglas Sirk 1950s film to the surface, something that wouldn't have been able to be said in that time. What's brought into a kind of open by Almodovar, given its due, given its treatment, whether that's something of gayness, whether it's something of, adultery, in a kind of unique and interesting way. It's a very Gomez pick. It's a very Gomesian film, as Connor would say. It does all the things, if you were to see, I'd love in a movie. Directorial vision, auteurism, classical style of Hollywood filmmaking, all in a kind of one picture. It's something I'd recommend to everyone. I've shown a bunch of people before. I've shown Shay, I've shown my friend Moss, and they've all, come away with good things. I don't know if Tony would like it, but Tony's often the one to kind of dislike my movie. So Broken Embraces.
Thank you, Anthony. Now, Kirk, what are you left with? You're left with every decade before the...
Well, I'm left with the one in the middle, which is the 2010s, which I'll take. I might have mixed it up if Anthony had thrown out 1864 lithograph or so, I don't know. But so I'm gonna stay modern and recent, and I'm gonna do Midsummer, directed by Ari Aster, also made Hereditary. I, perhaps controversially, believe that this is the far superior of the two. I think it's more coherent. It's a psychological thriller, if you haven't seen it, about college student and her boyfriend and a couple of his friends who travel to, I believe it's Sweden, to participate in a midsummer festival with an exchange student who takes them back to basically a commune. And it's, very idyllic and utopian. And then obviously a dark side is unearthed. But I think what makes this movie really shine is that we are treated to the perspective, which is a very troubled perspective, of the main character. She's very Western. She has these Western kind of affectations and mannerisms and perspective. And she's had a very traumatic experience recently. And so we're kind of treated to this intrapsychic perspective on, what it would be like to encounter a foreign culture with vastly divergent priorities, communal living, collectivism as opposed to individualism, and the idea of, even at one point, there's, very stark, I think it's the most horrifying part of the whole film, but the idea of the Judeo-Christian value of the sanctity of life is kind of presented in a very, very just gruesome way, in a way that you don't see in many films. So I'm very curious to hear if you've seen it. If you have, I think there are angles that we could take in our conversation that would produce ample topics and tangents. But yeah, so that's my pick.
Kirk, you said the magic words, all of that stuff about communities, the political readings of Midsummer, which I have seen and I do love. It's kind of a standout right now among the pack. But guys, let's hear some rebuttals. Who can make a case for their movie? Let's start with Tony and work our way back around.
Okay, so I'll say that I also love Midsummer. I think it's a perfect fit for the podcast. It's one I've thought about pitching myself a couple times. I've not seen Broken Embraces, and I'm ashamed to say I don't think I've ever seen an Almodovar film. I don't think I ever have. So I'm eager to kind of dive in. I know he's a favorite of Anthony's, and his films certainly sound interesting, and I'm eager to see kind of what the fuss is about. I like the idea of kind of bringing the subtext of the kind of the more seedy stuff from maybe the old melodramas to the surface in a modern context. I think that's a cool idea. So I think either of those would be good choices. I think Mass, the advantage is sort of in terms of the intensity, in terms of it being a really contained, focused movie. This is kind of a classic Tony movie. It's not like a Simon Killer or anything, but in terms of dealing with extremely dark subject matter in a very frank way. And I think taking something from it. What I admire about the movie is it faces the subject matter, not for its own sake, not to make a movie about this topic, but to bring something out of it, to find something in it, to what do we do? What do we do when we find ourselves faced with the unthinkable? When we find ourselves facing the worst things in life, the darkest, most unspeakable things in life? How do we move forward? And how do we draw meaning from it? Or is the very idea of trying to draw meaning from it kind of obscene and offensive? And I think that's such a rich and timeless question. And I think the movie deals with it in a way that I thought was incredibly remarkable, especially considering, again, it's a first-time writer and director tackling these topics with an incredible deftness and incredible sensitivity. So I think that even if we don't pick it, it's an absolute movie you should all watch when you get the chance. So that's my pitch.
A rousing defense of your movie, Tony. Now, Anthony, what do you have to say for your film or against?
Sure. So Tony's film I had never even heard of. As I said, hearing the description, hearing his defense of it, I'm getting 45 years vibes. Similar, kind of subject, similar ideas of a very Tony-esque movie, as you said, the kind of unthinkable, the sort of past that comes back, which, have their time and place, and I can't fault him for doing that. I picked a very Gomesian film. So I'm actually intrigued by Tony's movie, I gotta say. It could be good, could be interesting, I don't know. Kirk's film, I just gotta say, I'm not a huge Florence Pugh person. I never got into the movie. I don't know if it's because I'm also writing a dissertation on Sweden and paganism. Yeah, so I mean, maybe I need to revisit it. Maybe Kirk's thoughts on it will sway me to the side that I've been missing this whole time, because I had similar thoughts with Hereditary. As for Broken Embraces, let me just make clear too, it's set in the 2000s for the most part. It's not, set in the 1950s. It does have a very Douglas Sirk vibe. It's also a very Hitchcockian type movie, I'd say. And there's kind of two Almodovars, I think, that have emerged recently. There's one that remembers his kind of controversial, extremely graphic films of the 80s and 90s. And then there's the kind of sentimental side of him, the sort of one that came out recently, Parallel Mothers, or there's the sort of Antonio Banderas one whose name is slipping from my mind at the moment. But this one, I think, strikes the perfect balance between the sort of two sides. I think what it does is interesting. And I think what it is a sort of filmmaker throwing all his tricks onto a sort of film. It's a filmmaker also revisiting their own kind of history of what it meant to kind of work in this industry, which is something kind of interesting too, although maybe we've done enough of it with The Wizard of Speed and Time. So that's what I kind of have to say about mine and the others.
Thank you, Anthony. There's never too many movies about movies, obviously. It's always a fun topic. Now, Kirk.
Midsummer, fun movie, pretty straightforward. I think it's a very modern film, both in terms of substance and style, I would say, and a movie about stark contrasts. I think when you follow the main character, you can kind of have a conversation about how we empathize, how we root for folks in movies, perhaps especially in horror films, where they lose us, what they need to do to lose our empathy, to lose our rooting interests. But I think this film is a lot about like the loss of innocence, the loss of the kind of collective complacency and naivety of, suburban America in the second decade of this century. I don't know, the 2010s. I think there's something there. It's a little newer than, we've had a lot of social discussions about films that were in the aughts, with the emergence of kind of Facebook, the iPod, right? How music was changed. But this is a film that is past that, it's beyond that. It's like the proliferation of social media, kind of the ability to instantly commodify ourselves, to instantly check in with other people. And there is something that this film plays with, the lack of technology, kind of the bucolic asceticism, that is interesting in a way. And it's used in a kind of like an uncanny way that I really appreciate. So, I mean, yeah, there's a variety of paths to go. Also, we could talk about how Anthony's a misogynist for not liking Florence Pugh. So we could have that conversation as well.
I've been waiting to have the conversation for a long time, Kirk. Thank you. Guys, it sucks to have to pick. It sucks to have to pick for the next episode. The rebuttal game has been on point today. But, guys, I have to listen to my heart. And I'll be honest with you, I just have a thirst for a good old-fashioned Tony movie. I've missed those days. I need another compliance. I need something just really messed up that's going to shock me, and I'm going to be sort of totally shaking in my boots. It's really the reason I'm picking it. I can't say it will necessarily be the best for the podcast. I can't say it necessarily will have nearly the amount of reflection that possibly Midsommar or Broken Embraces might offer us. But I just want to give it a chance because I'm just feeling, there's something I'm feeling about this, maybe because I just watched Midnight Mass and I really like that. So if it's called Mass and it's recent, how bad could it be? But no, I'm curious. I'm intrigued. I don't know what kind of intensity it will be. but with when Tony's about, it's probably going to be something pretty intense. So I'm ready to be harrowed. I'm ready to be mentally exhausted, perhaps against my better judgment, but it's just the mood I'm in. I'm sorry. It's just how it is.
But no, I think this is a solid pick, and I'm excited to actually watch it again.
It's no problem, Tony. And if I could, in lieu of a sign off, if I could present my favorite line from The Wizard of Speed and Time. I forgot to do that. Usually I do that during the transition. But it's a moving line where the love interest character says to Mike Jittlov in the bedroom scene, "Our movie's the only way you touch people?" To which Mike Jittlov responds, "It's the safest way." And I know, like, of course, when you first see that, you think it's very creepy. I know. And the face he makes is also slightly creepy. But I find there's something very beautiful about that. It is the safest way. There's something kind of true about movies being able to connect us. We feel kind of lonely and feel misunderstood. There's something about the medium, of any medium, really, that can connect people. So I find that kind of poignant. But anyway, that's all, folks, for today. Thank you for joining us for the 706 podcast. Anthony, please sign us off.
I'll have what Kirk's having.
Nice.